The crystalline spires of Nixar Station refracted starlight in patterns that would have been beautiful to most species, but Valera noticed only the shadows they cast. What truly captivated her attention was the human vessel docking at Bay 17, its approach perfectly silent through the vacuum of space. Silence was sacred to the Luminari. Evolution on a world bathed in constant radiation storms had gifted Valera's people with extraordinary visual perception and telepathic abilities, but at the cost of hypersensitive auditory systems. Even moderate sounds caused them physical pain. The Luminari homeworld of Elysium had no birds, no rushing waters, only the whisper of wind through luminescent forests and the gentle movement of creatures evolved for stealth, which made Valera's diplomatic assignment to this multi-species hub particularly challenging. Ambassador Valera, the station's AI, chimed softly through her specialized earpiece, calibrated to deliver sound at frequencies barely perceptible to Luminari hearing. The human cultural delegation has arrived. They request your presence in Observation Deck 8 in 1 standard hour. Valera's iridescent skin flickered with anxiety patterns. Humans were notoriously loud. Their colonies and ships vibrated with what they called music, organized sound that served no apparent communication purpose. The concept was utterly alien to the Luminari, whose entire civilization was built on telepathic communion and visual signaling. Yet the Alliance Council had deemed this cultural exchange necessary. Recent territorial disputes between human expansion, vessels and Luminari deep space observatories had escalated dangerously. As junior ambassador, Valera's task was simple: establish common ground with these sound-loving beings before minor incidents became diplomatic catastrophes. She adjusted her protective suit, standard issue for Luminari diplomats serving off-world. Its neural dampeners would filter most auditory input, though the protection was imperfect. With a resigned flicker of her bioluminescent patches, Valera made her way to her quarters to prepare. The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss that made her wince. Inside, she removed her outer robe and examined herself in the reflection panel. 8 feet tall, with translucent skin that pulsed with inner light, she looked alien even to herself in this foreign environment. Her elongated limbs and fingers, designed for the precise visual language of her people, seemed awkward and ungainly outside Elysium. From her personal storage, Valera retrieved the ancient family pendant, a crystal that had once belonged to her grandmother, the first Luminari to ever meet humans. Legend said the old ambassador had actually found beauty in their chaotic ways. Valera had always doubted this family tale. Ambassador Rivak, her superior, had warned her before departure. The humans expressed themselves through vibrations in air molecules, barbaric and painful, but fascinating in its primitive way. Study them, understand them, but never forget your duty to protect our people's interests. As she made final adjustments to her telepathic amplifier, a device that would project her thoughts to non-telepathic species, Valera's inner light pulsed. With determination, she would endure this assignment, establish the necessary diplomatic protocols, and return to the blessed silence of Elysium as quickly as possible. She could not have imagined that in less than a standard month, her entire understanding of beauty, communication, and herself would be irrevocably transformed by a human male named Orlan Kazai, and the impossible art form he called dance. Observation Deck 8 had been modified for the diplomatic meeting. Light panels dimmed to accommodate Luminari visual sensitivity, sound dampening fields engaged at maximum. Still, Valera felt the vibrations before the doors parted. Multiple, bipedal creatures moving, their footfalls creating micro-tremors despite the station's best technological precautions. The human delegation consisted of 5 representatives. 4 stood in formal posture near the viewing portal, but the 5th, this one, was different. While the others remained stationary, this human moved with peculiar, deliberate motions. His hands traced patterns in the air, his weight shifting from foot to foot in what appeared to be a measured sequence. Ambassador Valera of the Luminari Collective, announced Station Director Kovash, a Taraxian whose exoskeleton had been polished to a ceremonial shine. May I present Cultural Attaché Captain Orlan Kazai and the Earth Alliance diplomatic team. Valera's translator rendered the introduction, while her telepathic amplifier projected her formal greeting. I extend the light of understanding and cooperation. The lead human, Orlan Kazai, stepped forward. His physical characteristics registered in Valera's heightened perception. Approximately 6.2 feet tall, melanin-rich skin, symmetrical facial features with unusual golden-flecked irises. But what struck her most was how he moved. Each step, precise yet flowing as though his body followed invisible currents. Ambassador, Orlan spoke, his voice carefully modulated through the station's adaptive acoustics. We come seeking harmony between our peoples. The word choice, harmony, caused a ripple of discomfort through Valera's nervous system. A musical reference, already imposing their sound-centric worldview. Our mission is primarily cultural exchange, continued another human, introducing herself as Diplomatic Officer Giotti. We believe recent misunderstandings stem from fundamental differences in perception. A diplomatic way of acknowledging that your exploration vessels blast deafening signals into spaces where our observatories operate, Valera projected, her inner lights flashing with barely controlled irritation. The humans exchanged glances. Their facial micro-expressions registered confusion, then understanding. We've developed new protocols, Orlan said, pulling a data crystal from his uniform pocket. Sound-free navigation systems for all vessels operating near luminary space, a gesture of our commitment. The meeting progressed through technical details, territorial agreements, and communication protocols. Throughout, Valera found her attention repeatedly drawn to Orlan's movements. Even standing still, something about him suggested perpetual motion, a kinetic potential that both disturbed and fascinated her. As the formal portion concluded, Orlan approached her directly. Ambassador, with your permission, our cultural presentation has been specially adapted. We understand sound causes your people discomfort, so we've prepared a visual demonstration of our art form called dance. No audio components. Valera's translator struggled with the unfamiliar concept. Dance rendered as purposeful movement expression art in her language. You wish to move. As communication, she projected, genuinely puzzled. Yes, Orlan replied, his expression earnest. Dance is movement given meaning. I believe it might serve as a bridge between our species. Before she could formulate a response, alarms blared throughout the station, painfully loud even through her protective systems. Valera doubled over, her bioluminescence flaring chaotically in distress patterns as the announcement cut through the noise. Emergency protocols engaged. Gravitational anomaly detected. All personnel secure positions. Impact imminent. The last thing Valera saw before the station's gravity failed was Orlan Kazai lunging toward her. His movements no longer artistic, but urgently protective as the deck beneath them shuddered violently. In the sudden weightlessness, Valera's luminary physiology betrayed her. Evolution on a stable, heavy-gravity world had left her species ill-equipped for zero-G conditions. Her elongated limbs flailed uselessly as momentum carried her toward the observation deck's massive viewport. Then firm hands gripped her shoulders. Orlan Kazai had launched himself after her, his body moving with astonishing precision through the gravity-less environment. I've got you, he said, his voice barely audible through the station's emergency sirens and her protective ear coverings. Try to relax your body. The physical contact, rare and uncomfortable for her touch-averse species, was less distressing than expected. Orlan's grip stabilized her, and Valera watched in fascination as he used subtle movements of his torso and legs to control their trajectory toward a secure handrail. Around them, chaos unfolded. The other humans and station personnel anchored, themselves to fixed points, but several loose objects became dangerous projectiles. A datapad smashed into a control panel, sending sparks across the darkening room. Through her protective gear, Valera heard the station AI announce, "Gravitational. Restoration protocols engaged. Estimated time to system recovery, 16 minutes. Emergency power diverted to life support and hull integrity. 16 minutes suspended in this painful cacophony of alarms and shouts seemed an eternity. Yet Orlen, still securing her with one hand, made a swift gesture to his team. The humans responded instantly, moving with coordinated precision to secure floating debris. "How do you move so effectively without gravity?" Valera projected, her thought patterns tinged with both distress and curiosity. Orlen's expression changed. She recognized the configuration as a smile, though luminary facial muscles were incapable of the expression. "Dance training," he replied, simply. Zero-G choreography is basic training for spaceborne humans. The concept momentarily distracted Valera from her discomfort. "You practice movement for non-practical purposes in zero gravity?" "Movement is communication," he explained, using his free arm to subtly adjust their position as they drifted. "In space, survival often depends on how precisely you can control your body." As the minutes passed, Valera observed Orlen's micro-adjustments, the controlled flexing of core muscles, the deliberate positioning of limbs. What had seemed random now revealed its sophisticated purpose. He wasn't just moving, he was speaking, through motion, calculating physics and momentum with each subtle shift. When emergency lighting finally flickered on and the station's gravity began its phased restoration, Orlen guided their descent to the deck plates with surprising gentleness. "Are you injured?" he asked, finally releasing her once they were stable. "No physical damage," she projected, her inner lights pulsing with a complex emotion her translator couldn't properly render, something between gratitude and profound confusion. "Station director." Kovash scuttled toward them on multiple legs. "Apologies to all delegates. A misalignment in the station's dark matter collectors caused a temporary gravitational disruption. Technical teams report the issue is resolved." The crisis passed quickly, but its effect on Valera lingered. As the diplomatic meeting adjourned with promises to reconvene the following cycle, she found herself pondering Orlen's movements. How his body had communicated information her telepathic senses couldn't access. There was knowledge there, language written in kinetics rather than sound or thought. That night, in the silence of her quarters, Valera accessed the station's information network, searching for data on human dance. Her protective filters removed all audio components, leaving only visual recordings of humans moving in synchronized patterns. She watched for hours, her scientist's mind cataloging and analyzing. Without sound, the movements seemed random at first, but patterns emerged. Stories told through body language, emotions expressed through position and momentum, a complex grammar of gesture. For the first time, Valera wondered if there might be more to human expression than the painful noise her people had always avoided. Part 4. Silent Rhythms. 3 days after the gravitational incident, Valera found herself in Auxiliary Chamber 12, specially modified for the cultural demonstration Orlen had proposed. The room had been stripped of all unnecessary equipment, its walls lined with additional sound-dampening material. Most significantly, the floor had been replaced with a specialized polymer that would not transmit vibrations. "We've taken every precaution," Orlen explained, as technicians made final adjustments. "No audio output whatsoever. The demonstration will be entirely visual." Valera's diplomatic training hadn't prepared her for this uncertainty. Her people had always avoided human cultural expressions, dismissing them as painfully noise-centered. Yet her research and the Zero-G incident had awakened a scientific curiosity she couldn't ignore. "Proceed," she projected, taking a position near the exit, a precaution should the experience prove uncomfortable. The lights dimmed to a spectrum soothing to luminary vision. Orlen stepped to the center of the room, now dressed in close-fitting attire that emphasized his body's contours. He nodded to a technician, who activated a holographic backdrop, a star field that slowly rotated around the chamber. Then Orlen began to move. Without music, without sound of any kind, his movements should have appeared random, meaningless. Instead, Valera found herself transfixed. Orlan's body created shapes that transformed fluidly from one form to another. His arms extended and contracted in precise arcs. His legs propelled him across the floor in patterns that suggested orbital mechanics. He was dancing to silence, yet his body followed a rhythm Valira could somehow perceive. A visual tempo marked by the controlled tension and release of muscles, by the deliberate acceleration and deceleration of limbs. Most fascinating was how the movement affected her telepathic senses. Though humans had minimal telepathic signature, Valira detected emotional overtones radiating from Orlan. Not projected thoughts, but raw feelings expressed through physical form. Longing, discovery, wonder. After 12 minutes, Orlan completed, his performance with a final pose that somehow suggested both completion and continuation. Valira realized she had moved closer, drawn forward unconsciously until she stood mere feet from him. That was an adapted form of contemporary ballet, Orlan explained, his breathing slightly accelerated, choreographed specifically to communicate, without sound. It had structure, Valira projected, purpose. Like a mathematical equation expressed through biological means. Orlan smiled. That's an insightful comparison. Dance combines mathematical precision with emotional expression. The best dancers make you feel the invisible music even in silence. But why? The question formed involuntarily in her mind. Why expend such energy for non-survival purposes? Why do Luminari create light sculptures? He countered gently. Art isn't about survival. It's about transcending survival, finding meaning beyond necessity. The comparison startled her. Light sculpture was indeed the highest luminary art form, the precise manipulation of bioluminescence to create ephemeral patterns that conveyed complex philosophical concepts. You've studied our culture, she observed. Of course, I've been preparing for this mission for 3 years. He hesitated, then added, would you be willing to try? Try? To dance? Seeing her confusion, he clarified. Not the technical movements, but the fundamental concept. Expressing yourself through movement rather than telepathy. Everything in Valira's diplomatic training warned against such inappropriate cultural blending. Yet her scientific curiosity, and something else, something less definable, prompted her to respond. Show me how to begin. Orlan extended his hand, palm up. First, we establish connection. Among humans, touch often initiates synchronized movement. Valira's elongated fingers hovered above his palm. Physical contact between species was rare outside medical necessity. Yet after a moment's hesitation, she allowed her fingertips to rest against his skin. The connection was electric, not unpleasant but intensely unfamiliar. Through that simple touch, she sensed the subtle tension in his muscles, the controlled energy in his body. Now, Orlan said quietly, mirror my movements. Don't think, just follow. He raised his free arm in a slow arc above his head. After a moment, Valira followed, her longer limb creating a different but complementary shape. For 10 minutes they moved together in the silent chamber, human and luminari, creating a rudimentary duet that bridged their biological differences. When they finished, Valira's bioluminescence had formed patterns across her skin. Not the diplomatic signals she consciously controlled, but deeper, more primitive light configurations that reflected emotional states. This requires further study, she projected, withdrawing her hand and retreating to a formal distance, for diplomatic purposes. But as she left the chamber, Valira knew something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of human expression, and perhaps in her understanding of herself. 3 weeks into the diplomatic mission, Nixar Station's chief medical officer requested an emergency consultation with Ambassador Rivak and Valira. The senior ambassador's translucent features darkened with concern as they entered the medical bay. Explain this urgency, Rivak projected, his bioluminescent patterns conveying diplomatic authority. The Taraxian physician gestured toward neural imaging displays. Ambassador Valira's routine health scans show anomalous activity in her auditory processing centers and motor coordination complex. Valera felt a chill of apprehension. She had continued her cultural research with Orlan almost daily, learning rudimentary dance forms while studying human movement theory. These sessions remained officially documented as diplomatic exchanges, but they had evolved into something more personal, a shared exploration of communication beyond words or thoughts. "Is there physical damage?" Rivak demanded. "Not damage," the physician clarified. Adaptation. Her neural pathways are reconfiguring to process rhythmic information differently. Essentially, her brain is developing new pathways to interpret patterns of movement as a form of language. Rivak's inner light pulsed with shock. "This violates our biological preservation protocols. The human cultural exposure must end immediately." "Wait," Valera interjected, her thought voice stronger than intended. "This adaptation could be diplomatically valuable. I'm developing the ability to understand human expression without telepathic technology." The senior ambassador fixed her with a cold gaze. "Your family has always harbored dangerous fascination with humans. Your grandmother's eccentric theories nearly compromised our species' autonomy during first contact. Now you follow her path toward biological corruption." The accusation stung precisely because it contained truth. Valera had always been drawn to her grandmother's journals, controversial texts describing human expression as beautiful in its alien complexity. Now she found herself defending the same perspective. "The Alliance Council requires meaningful cultural exchange," Valera argued. "My research advances that objective." "Research?" Rivak's luminescence flickered with skepticism. "The station's security logs show you spending 17 hours in private sessions with the human dancer. This exceeds diplomatic requirements." Valera hadn't realized her activities were being monitored so closely. Before she could formulate a response, the medical bay doors opened, admitting Orlan and Station Director Kovash. "Forgive the interruption," Kovash chittered, "but we face a more urgent situation. Long-range sensors have detected an approaching vessel of unknown configuration. It's transmitting on frequencies that match neither Alliance nor known independent signatures." Orlan stepped forward. "The transmission pattern suggests Drift Collective technology. If confirmed, this represents first contact with a species that has avoided all previous diplomatic overtures." "Drift Collective?" Rivak's translator struggled with the term. "A nomadic species," Orlan explained. "They exist in the void between solar systems, harvesting energy from cosmic radiation. Our xenolinguistics team believes they communicate through modulated gravity waves. Essentially, they speak by manipulating the fabric of space-time itself." Valera's scientific mind immediately grasped the implications. That would explain the gravitational anomaly 3 weeks ago. Not a technical malfunction, a communication attempt. Kovash's exoskeleton rattled in confirmation. "Our analysis supports that theory. The approaching vessel is significantly larger than the probe that caused the previous incident. If it attempts similar communication while this close to the station..." "Catastrophic structural failure," Orlan finished, "unless we can respond in kind before they reach transmission range." All eyes turned to Valera, whose neural adaptation suddenly represented not corruption, but opportunity. Her grandmother's controversial research had theorized that luminary telepathic abilities and hypersensitive perception evolved from the same genetic source that made them vulnerable to sound. That same sensitivity, now partially rewired through her dance studies, might allow her to perceive gravitational frequencies others could not. "I need access to the gravitational sensor array," she projected decisively. "And I need Orlan's assistance." Rivak's objection came swiftly. "This exceeds your diplomatic authority." "With respect, Ambassador," Orlan interjected, "it may be our only option. The Drift Collective could represent either a valuable alliance or an existential threat, depending solely on first contact outcomes." Hours later, Valera stood in the station's primary sensor hub, surrounded by holographic displays showing gravitational wave patterns. Orlan worked beside her, configuring the dark matter collectors to function as rudimentary transmitters. The patterns, Valera projected, studying the incoming frequencies. They're structured like choreography, sequential movements through space. Orlan nodded. Dance is ultimately about moving through space and time in meaningful patterns. If the Drift Collective communicates through gravity waves, then they're dancing on a cosmic scale, Valera finished, her inner light pulsing with sudden understanding. And I need to learn their dance. The observation deck had been transformed into an improvised communication center. Engineers had rerouted the station's gravitational systems to Valera's specifications, creating a setup that would allow precise manipulation of localized gravity fields. The approaching Drift Collective vessel now loomed large on the view screen, a massive structure of interconnected crystalline spheres that seemed to shimmer in and out of conventional space. Conventional hailing frequencies still unanswered, reported a communications officer. Estimated time to critical proximity 17 minutes. Ambassador Rivak maintained his opposition, but had been overruled by Station Director Kovash, who invoked emergency protocols granting operational authority to whoever offered the best chance of preventing catastrophe. Now the senior luminary diplomat stood silently at the back of the chamber, his inner light dimmed in disapproval. Valera stood on a circular platform at the center of the room. Around her, holographic displays showed the gravitational wave patterns emanating from the approaching vessel, complex rhythmic fluctuations that followed mathematical progressions, unlike anything in Alliance databases. The patterns are accelerating, she projected, her bioluminescence flickering rapidly as she processed the information. They're preparing to transmit a more complex message. Orlan stood nearby at a specialized control interface. 3 weeks of dancing together had created an unspoken understanding between them, a communication channel that transcended their biological differences. The gravitational manipulation system is online, he confirmed, but we'll only get one chance at this. The power requirements are enormous and the station systems weren't designed for this kind of output. Valera turned to face him fully, her translucent features catching the light from the displays. I need you to dance with me. The request silenced the bustling activity around them. Even Ravak's disapproval gave way to confusion. I don't understand, Orlan said. The control interface is too slow, she explained. I need to feel the gravity patterns directly and respond instinctively. Your human dance training allows precise control of your body in variable gravity conditions. My evolved sensitivity and neural adaptations allow me to perceive the patterns. Together, we might replicate their communication method. Understanding dawned across Orlan's features. A duet, yes, but instead of moving to music, music will move to us, he finished. The gravitational fields will respond to our movements. Engineer Lucian, monitoring the power systems, looked skeptical. You're suggesting we translate alien, gravitational language through interpretive dance? Essentially, yes, Orlan confirmed without hesitation. Kovash chittered anxiously. The approaching vessel has begun gravitational fluctuations. Our structural integrity field is already compensating, but if they increase amplitude, we're out of alternatives, Orlan declared, stepping onto the platform beside Valera. Route gravitational control to the motion sensors in this chamber. As engineers rushed to comply, Valera focused on the approaching vessel's patterns, her newly adapted neural pathways processing the information differently than any computer could. They're not just communicating, they're questioning, testing whether we understand their language. Orlan positioned himself opposite her on the platform. How do we respond? By echoing their patterns with variations, showing comprehension while introducing ourselves. Her inner light pulsed with determination. Follow my lead initially, then respond to my movements with complementary forms. The platform beneath them hummed as power flowed into the reconfigured systems. Around them, the air seemed to thicken as localized gravitational fields came under their control. Systems online, announced Engineer Lucian. The platform will translate your movements into gravitational wave patterns at 10% normal gravity to start. Be careful, this technology is completely experimental. Valera extended her elongated arms. After a moment's hesitation, Orlin stepped forward and took her hands in his. The first movements were tentative, Valira replicating the basic pattern she had observed from the Drift Collective, Orlin following her lead. As they moved, subtle gravitational pulses emanated from the platform, rippling outward toward the approaching vessel. "They've paused their approach," someone reported. "Gravitational emissions stable." Encouraged, Valira increased the complexity of her movements, incorporating elements of the dances Orlin had taught her, but structured according to the mathematical progressions of the alien signals. Orlin responded instinctively, his human adaptability complementing her luminary precision. Their bodies moved in counterpoint, creating gravitational harmonies that no computer algorithm could have devised. Where Valira's movements were flowing and ethereal, Orlin's provided grounding and structure. Together they wove a gravitational tapestry that spoke of diversity within unity, of communication across biological difference. On the view screen, the Drift Collective vessel began to pulse. With internal light, its crystalline structures refracting colors in complex patterns. "They're responding," exclaimed Kovash. Visual signals accompanying gravitational patterns. As their dance continued, Valira felt something extraordinary happening. The neural adaptations that had begun with her dance lessons accelerated, her hypersensitive luminary physiology merging with newly formed pathways. She could feel the gravitational waves not just as abstract patterns but as a language, expressions of identity, curiosity, and connection from beings who experienced reality very differently than either humans or Luminari. They navigate by gravity. She projected to Orlin as they moved together. They perceived the universe as interconnected gravitational fields. Our conventional signals meant nothing to them. Through their dance, Valira and Orlin established the basic parameters of communication: acknowledgement, greeting, peaceful intention. The Drift Collective responded with increasingly complex patterns that their movement dialogue gradually decoded: curiosity about solid matter life forms, apology for the earlier gravitational incident, and invitation to deeper exchange. When they finally stopped, exhausted but triumphant, the Drift Collective vessel had stabilized in a synchronous orbit with the station, its gravitational emissions now carefully modulated to avoid structural damage. "You did it," Kovash chittered in amazement. First contact established and catastrophe averted. Valira looked at Orlin, whose eyes reflected the holographic displays surrounding them. Human and Luminari, they had bridged not only their own biological differences but opened communication with a truly alien intelligence. Ambassador Rivak approached slowly, his inner light revealing reluctant admiration. "The Council will want a complete report. This method is unprecedented." "Not entirely," Valira responded, her thoughts steady and clear. "My grandmother theorized that communication transcends evolutionary boundaries when we find the shared foundations beneath our differences." Later, as the station's diplomatic team prepared for formal negotiations with the Drift Collective, Valira found Orlin in Auxiliary Chamber 12, their practice room. He stood looking out at the stars, his body still except for the subtle rise and fall of his breathing. "The gravitational sensors confirm the Drift Collective communicates through what we might call cosmic choreography," she projected, joining him at the viewport. "Their entire civilization is built around the art of manipulating space-time itself." Orlin turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "So an entire species communicates through dance, essentially?" "Yes. And a species that once found all sound painful discovered that movement could bridge worlds." "Will you return to Elysium when the diplomatic mission concludes?" he asked. Valira's inner light formed patterns that needed no translation. "My neural adaptations are permanent. I've been changed by this experience, by dancing with you, by learning to perceive rhythm without sound." "Some might call that a sacrifice," Orlin observed. "I call it evolution." Her luminescence pulsed with newfound certainty. "My people have avoided sound for millennia, believing protection meant isolation. But true protection comes through understanding." Outside the viewport, the Drift Collective vessel shifted position, sending subtle gravitational waves toward the station. Not communication now, but something simpler. Acknowledgement of kindred. Spirits who had learned to dance across the void. Valira extended her hand to Orlin. Teach me another dance, this time perhaps with what you call music, at very low volume. As his hand met hers, Valira knew that whatever future awaited, diplomatic service, scientific research, or cultural exchange, she would forever carry the rhythm he had awakened within her. The profound understanding that communication, like life itself, evolved not by avoiding differences, but by learning to dance with them.